Anybody joining us this afternoon, we'd like to welcome you all to a special episode of Never Again Live with Mayor Halevi Weinstein. Our special guest today will be BARUCH BEN-YOSEPH, who's joining us live from Israel. Just a quick little background on BARUCH. Basically, after completing high school in New York, in the Bronx, of all places, he then picked up and made Aliyah, moved to Israel, and enlisted in a special force commando unit of the IDF before attending Bar-Ilan University, and today he practices law in Israel. So without any further ado, we're going to introduce Meir Halevi Weinstein. He'll talk to us a little bit about whatever it is he chooses to talk to us about this afternoon, and then he'll introduce BARUCH. So sit back, enjoy, and remember to like us, share us, join us on Facebook and on YouTube Live, and also go and join israelnow.ca. And without any further ado, Meir, take over.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to ask everyone who's joining us, please share this with the different social media platforms that you use, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. There's a lot more. Please share this. We'll reach a lot more people. We'll have a stronger impact. Today, we're not going to use the phone-in for today, but there is a chat. There's an ongoing chat. We'll respond to your messages. If you have questions or comments, we'll respond that way. Also, we're going to be talking about what is a Jewish government according to the vision and the teachings of Rabbi Meir Kahane. Now, there's a lot going on. Let's be honest. We're not talking in a vacuum of anything. The government of Israel recently listed, added to their list of terror organizations, 6 more organizations that are heavily involved with the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to show some video about that, who they are, expose who they are. But the question is also, how many Arabs in Israel, what kind of percentage is there in Israel that agree with those organizations, not with the listing by the Israeli government, but try to say that these organizations are human rights organizations, for instance. There's a member of Knesset, in the Israeli Knesset, an Arab leader, Ayman Odeh, who heads the Arab List Party. He publicly stated on his Twitter account that he supports those organizations that were listed. In fact, we have a picture we're going to show of Ayman Odeh, the head of the Arab List Party, congratulating one of the leaders of the PFLP, the leader Gerard. So, and we have a video. There's the picture of Ayman Odeh with PFLP leader, one of the leaders, Khalida Gerard, congratulating her as she was released from prison, one of the many times she spent in prison for her involvement with the PFLP. And she definitely incites violence. So she's clear, the writings are there, the statements are there from Khalida Gerard. There's been attacks inside Israel by the PFLP, rabbis being murdered, just innocent Jews being murdered. There's the Sparrow Pizza parlor in Yerushalayim where there was an attack, Jews murdered, there were rabbis and families in their homes just butchered by the PFLP. And there's a long list of involvement from PFLP. There was a video recently put out, and pictures, in fact, the former Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, he posted on his Facebook account a video and a picture that was put out of the Ram Party in Israel. The Ram Party in Israel, when they signed a coalition agreement with Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, there was a personality, a high-ranking official in the Ram Party that was in the background, in the picture and in the video of this official signing. And then investigations have just revealed this past week his involvement with leaders of Hamas. So what is going on? We have those videos. We're going to be showing those videos. Mark could comment on them as well. But I thought there's a problem in the Hasbara community explaining the right of Israel to exist, defending our rights. They're coming from angles that really are not congruent with the Torah. The big reason to support Israel, some of them say, is because there's a gay pride parade in Israel. That's the reason to support Israel. In this past Shabbat, we read Parshas Chaya Sarah. And Sarah dies, and Abraham goes to purchase Hebron, a plot of land in Hebron, in order to bury his wife Sarah. And while he's trying to come to a deal, to an arrangement to purchase the land, he meets with the Hittites, and he says the line, "I am a foreigner and a resident among you. Grant me possession of the gravesite with you, so I may bury my dead from my presence." So it says, the rabbis comment on that in the Midrash, and they say, how do they explain this? Like, it's a contradictory sentence, what he said. I am a foreigner and a resident among you. If you agree, then I am a stranger. If we can make a deal, I'm a foreigner to you. I'm just coming here to make a purchase like anybody else in the world community. If not, if you don't agree to do a normal transaction real estate deal, if not, I will be as a resident and will rightfully take it. For God has told me, to your descendants, I will give this land. God promised this land to the Jewish people. First to Abraham and his descendants, our forefathers, all the way to Moses, to the Jewish people. That's our claim to Israel. When Ben-Gurion stood up in the Peel Commission and raised the Chumash and said, this is our claim to the land of Israel, that's our claim. And so what is a Jewish government? Is it a government that strikes a deal with an Arab party that has officials in the party that have relations, high-ranking relations with Hamas? Is it a government that says these organizations are terrorist organizations and they're involved in raising funds for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine? They want to kill Jews, and they have a track record of killing Jews. And we're going to outlaw these organizations that are affiliate organizations of PFLP. How far does this government go? Do they outlaw and blacklist or expel people living in Israel, in the state of Israel, who are involved with those terrorist organizations? What is the difference, the essential difference of the vision of a Jewish government, a true Jewish government, and an Israeli government? And Israeli has a very broad definition. Is there a difference between an Israeli and a Jew? We'll be covering these issues. Baruch, how are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You missed a great Shabbat in Hebron.
Tell us
Tens of
about
thousands of Jews. Oh, it was great. Tens of thousands of Jews came to Hebron this past Shabbat to celebrate commemorate the purchase of the cave of the Machpelah by Abraham to bury Sarah. And in fact, I was asked to speak in front of a group, and I basically said, a few weeks ago we read in the Torah how God gave Abraham the land. But when you get a present, it's like purchasing something. You need to do an act of purchase according to Jewish law. It's not enough that you were just given the land. You have to do something. My understanding always was that God tells Abraham to go out and walk through the land. And I thought that's how he showed his ownership of the land, by walking through it. But really, I see that the rabbis say that that's a very weak kind of purchase to just walk through the land. Because walking, you could be like a tourist, you know. It doesn't really show you own anything. And I found I actually on Rosh Hashanah, I was with my daughter and son-in-law and my grandchildren who live in Hebron in the city. And I just said to them, "What do you think? How did Abraham show that he owned the land that was given to him as a present? How did he show the possessive power of that present?" And one of my granddaughters is very smart. She said, "Because Abraham bought the Machpelah and he buried Sarah. That was the sign of the ownership." And that's what I told the people. I said, the Machpelah, besides all of its spiritual greatness, it's the sign that it's the proof that we own the land that was given to Abraham by Hashem, by God, and by him purchasing it and burying Sarah there. That was the act of purchase that makes it ours. So anyhow, tens of thousands of Jews came and had a great Shabbat.
That's phenomenal, and it would be even better if the government would really build up Hebron for the Jewish people, which they've failed to. I mean, there's like a leaky roof, and there's a whole controversy if we could even make a ramp for disabled people to get in easier.
Well, we're going to discuss tonight. I mean, I guess by you it's afternoon.
Right.
This concept of the Jewish government through the Rabbi Kahane's teachings in the book of the Jewish Idea, the authentic Jewish idea. And it's interesting, Meir, that when you study the book, Rabbi, the greatest book written by Rabbi Kahane, that I've heard rabbis say it's the greatest book that's been written since the Vilna Gaon. That means 250 years ago. It's the greatest book written. But you really, to learn a book, you really have to read it in its order. Rabbi Kahane purposely wrote it in such a way that you really have to read it from cover to cover, because every chapter leads into the next chapter.
Right.
So if you skip a chapter, you're missing the foundation of the next chapter. But for lack of time, you can jump from chapter to chapter, but you're really not getting the full
Mm-hmm.
power of the statement. So,
Right.
for instance, like there's a chapter about the Jewish government, but I believe that there are certain chapters that have to be read before to really understand it.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, tonight this afternoon again, I would like to discuss something that I found in the chapter, which is called Faith and Trust,
Mm-hmm.
which deals, I think, is the basis to understand the understanding of what the Jewish government is supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
So in this chapter, now I like to use the Hebrew version and translate over the translated version, only because I don't know who did the translation, and sometimes it's not as accurate. Rabbi Kahane wrote it in Hebrew, and later was translated by somebody else. So in the middle of this chapter, he says, "And God commanded upon the people of Israel to be a nation unto itself, alone, separated from the nations," as it says, to be separated, to Israel to be separated from the nations, what we call Havdalah, right? Every Saturday night after Shabbat, we make Havdalah. So that was a very important concept by Rabbi Kahane, Havdalah, separation of holy from profane, and the Jews from the nations. In order for the nation to be separated from the culture, the foreign culture of the nations, and therefore he also gave us a special land, the land of Israel, that there and only there can the Jews live a godly life and build a society and a state of Torah and complete holiness. The command of being separate and alone, separated from the goyim, from the nations, requires complete and total trust, without a ounce of doubt, that God is the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings, that created the world and all the nations in it, that controls the world, and everything in it, that he can do to the nations whatever he wants, and therefore there's nothing to be afraid of, as it says in the book of Psalms, because as God has the kingdom and he rules the nations. So we see first of all that's the foundation of the Jewish government, of the Jewish state, of the Jewish society, is this concept of total separation. So total separation based totally on complete trust that God is the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. Without that, I don't care what kind of government you have, and I don't care who's sitting in it. It could be, the most religious person, most pious person, most learned person. But if he doesn't have that trust that he wants to, that he believes that we have to be totally separate, not rely on the nations, he's not going to have a real Jewish government. That's why we see what you discussed before, what we see going on today, and what we've had almost totally throughout the history of the state of Israel.
Right.
Except maybe there were certain windows we saw where this trust prevailed, even by irreligious Jews, like in the 6-Day War, where they totally ignored the nations and did what needed to be done to have this tremendous victory that was almost unheralded in history. Such a great victory.
Right.
So he goes on to say, Rabbi Kahane goes on to say that a person who's lacking this faith, and he's considered a person of small faith, the concept of being separate from the nation scares him to death. He says even the most pious Jews, the Haredim, are afraid of this concept of isolation, because a person who's weak in faith wants to have as many friends as possible. He wants to have as many treaties and covenants that he can make with the nations, so that he can rely on stronger nations to protect him in time of danger. But whoever relies on the nations for help, and that fears that without the help of flesh and blood, he cannot prevail, and the people of Israel cannot survive in its land, he is a person who has failed the test of faith and trust in God. And he says that's the basis. The basis of it. Can you imagine? He used to go around. I remember you used to going around with him. I'm sure when you went around with him also.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter who the president of the United States was. He'd always be challenged by somebody, and usually it would be the Orthodox audiences that would do it. They challenged the rabbi, said, "Rabbi, yeah, what you're saying is right, but whoever the president was, President Reagan, President Bush, whoever, he's not going to let you do what you want." So then he'd say, "Well, who's stronger, God or President Reagan?"
Right.
And people said, "What a stupid question. Of course God's stronger." So he'd say, so if God's stronger than President Reagan, who cares what President Reagan says? And then the people all of a sudden went speechless. They couldn't, they realized that he just challenged their faith and trust. Do they really believe in God, or do they believe in Ronald Reagan? And that's really what it boils down to. So an Israeli government, a true Israeli Jewish government, has to be able to stand up and say to the President of America, to the United Nations or whomever, with all due respect, you're not going to tell us where to settle and when to settle and how much to settle. We're going to settle the land of Israel whenever, wherever, and as much as we want. And that's the true test of faith. And you see what goes on here is that why there are only 500,000 Jews living in the Judea and Samaria instead of 1 million? Because over the years, all the Israeli governments had freezes because of threats by Obama or this or Bush or this one or that one. And despite that, we see that it's It's a blessing that we have 500,000, but we should have more than that, much more than that.
Right. Right.
So to understand whether the right type of government in Israel is a monarchy, is a democracy, is a republic, whatever the form of government that exists, I prefer the concept of a monarchy, because I believe that's what God dictates to us. But whatever it is, it's got to be based on this fundamental concept of true faith and trust in God. Because without that, it doesn't matter.
We have on the chat, somebody is asking a question, so I want to read it, and you can address it. Does being separate from the nations mean that we can't have treaties? Shlomo HaMelech had treaties. Moshe Rabbeinu was told to make deals with Moab and Bnei Tzur.
No, well, that's not true. Moshe Rabbeinu did not make any deals with Moab or Bnei Seir. Moshe Rabbeinu was told not to attack them for certain reasons, but he didn't make any treaties, and he, in fact, you're not allowed to make any treaties. Any kind of treaties was considered very bad. Moshe Rabbeinu did make one very serious mistake, which later on was David HaMelech. In the time of Yoshua, they made the same mistake. A second time was that a certain nation, the Givonim, they pretended to be a nation from somewhere afar, not living in the land of Israel, and they wanted to make a treaty, and he basically agreed to let them live amongst Israel and be the wood choppers and the water gatherers. And it turned out later that they were really the Givonim. They were really living inside the land with the Canaanites, and they weren't supposed to make a treaty with them. But because he did make a treaty, we were punished for that. And later on, the same thing happened with Joshua, with Joshua. The same thing happened. Shlomo Melech made treaties. That's true. It was very bad. It was one of the worst things that he could possibly do, is make treaties with these nations. The fact that a leader does that, it doesn't mean that it's right. Even the greatest of leaders can make a mistake. But the bottom line, that's not what God wants. God does not want us to make any treaties and have any reliance whatsoever on the nations. He wants us to be a nation that trusts in Him and not in anybody else.
So, Baruch, are any of the Arab or Islamic countries making treaties and ceding land? And are they democracies, these Arab and Islamic countries? Are they human rights adherents? Like surrounding Israel, what kind of countries are there? I don't believe they are. I believe they're monarchies, they're dictatorships, they're even Jordan, none of them.
Look, well, bottom line is, I think that the worst thing that happened to the Arab nations was the introduction of democracy to them. That because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in this area of the world. People can't be allowed to, dictate to their governments. It just doesn't work. They need strong leaders to keep them together. And we saw what happened when they introduced democracy. It just became civil war. Whether it was in Iraq or whether it was in Libya, or wherever it was.
Or Afghanistan.
So I think the best thing for the Arabs are monarchies or dictatorships. That works for them. Democracy doesn't work for them. And the bottom line is also democracy doesn't work anywhere, to be honest with you. It's not really. There's also a real concept of democracy. You see what happens in Israel. Israel's a so-called democracy, but in the end, the politicians do whatever they want. They tell the people one thing, and they do the exact opposite. Is that democracy? I don't know. It sounds to me like Ponzi scheme. I don't know what you call it. Rabbi Kahane tried to introduce the idea of a true democracy by saying national, either referendum or revolution. If you're not going to do what the people say, then give them the opportunity to have referendums. and let them decide. And if you're not going to let them decide, then they better do a revolution, because they're going to be facing these evil governments that have taken over and do what they want. Don't respect the people. Don't honor their wishes. So no, I don't think democracy is a good form of government, and I don't think I don't think dictatorships are good. I mean, a king is not necessarily a dictator. A king could be a very good thing if he's takes care of his people and doesn't persecute them.
Right.
And the treaties that were made with the Arab Emirates and Abu Dhabi and those fiefdoms, whatever you call them. I mean, it's totally a matter of economics. I believe that those countries, they're basically into making money. They make a lot of money. They're very rich countries, and they see economic opportunities by being having these treaties with Israel. Mm-hmm. Israel, on the other hand, besides also the economic side to it, I believe that they look at it as being an opportunity to show the world, here we can make peace with the Arab neighbors, and it's not us that's preventing peace, it's them.
Right.
And ultimately, in the end, because it's all self-interest on the part of these Arab nations, it's not going to last. It only lasts as long as they can make money out of it. The second they're not making any money, they're not going to be interested in honoring any treaty.
Right. Right.
So again, they also, whether it's economic issues or military issues or whatever issue it may be, again, God does not want us to have to rely on the nations for their help. I mean, remember, Israel, despite being a small country, was developing weaponry that even tremendous industrial nations weren't doing, like tanks. The Merkava tank, one of the best tanks in the world. We were making the Halevi fighter jet. Unfortunately, because we kowtowed to American pressure, we gave up the project to buy F-15s and F-16s, which was a terrible mistake. Terrible mistake. I mean, we're much better off being self-sufficient, not being kowtowed by the Americans, and developing our own weaponry, which is far superior to anything the Americans can make.
It's very interesting that when you mention that, because Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the United States, is on record saying now, after the whole issue of funding for the Iron Dome came up, that he says it's about time Israel starts reassessing that relationship. And he was implying that Israel's strong enough to just say, that's it, don't worry, we're on our own, it's fine, thank you, but no thank you. So,
exactly. The Iron Dome is a terrible innovation, because it's all defensive. Why is it defensive? Because if you can defend yourself, you don't need to fight back. Okay, so the fire missiles at you, you can knock out most of them, and then they pray that the rest of them won't kill anybody or cause any damage, and then they don't have to really fight. They don't have to attack the enemy or finish off the enemy, because we have what to defend ourselves with, which is a terrible concept. It's a terrible strategy. You mentioned before about the PFLP. I believe that they were behind the murder and assassination of the great Israeli general Rechavam Ze'evi.
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, it was them. And whoever doesn't know who Rechavam Ze'evi was, he was a great general who was the head of the Central Command of Israel. He was a intelligence officer, and he later became a politician from the Moledet party that had the platform of transferring the Arabs out of Israel, which is close to what the Rabbi Kahane was calling for. Now, Rechavam Zevi was we can't really say was a religious man. He did come from a religious background.
Oh, looks like it
But
froze.
he had, he was friends with, despite that, he professed transfer.
Right.
I actually knew him quite well, and I remember the day he was murdered. But I would like to point out is that when it came to military strategy, he, do you hear me?
Yes. Oh, just froze a little bit.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Hello? You can hear me now?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I can't. Do you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Rechavam Zevi was one of the main because he was the head of the Central Command during the period of the 70s, 1670s, when the Arab Fedayeen were coming over the Jordan River to attack Israel, do terrorist attacks in what was called the Eretz Mirdafim, the area that was over the Jordan, not far from Malay Adumim and places like that in the Judean desert. And these terrorists would come in and try to attack soldiers and kibbutznikim and moshavnikim that lived in the area. And the army would chase after them and try to catch them. Now, he basically professed the idea that the Israeli army can never be stagnant. It should never have fortresses and well-guarded bases. It should always be on the move. It should be a very, very quick and light army. In other words, so that, if a terrorist comes over the Jordan River to try to attack, the army should be right on top of him right away. Not wait for him to come and attack us. We should right away be able to go and chase after him, track him down, and remove him from this world. So that was his strategy, and his strategy was 100% right. The Israeli army can't be a stagnant, well-armed, what would you call it? Like today, they have the soldiers riding around in bulletproof vehicles, wearing all kinds of protective gear, instead of being an offensive kind of offensive units that put the fear of God into the Arabs, that they won't want to attack us. And that's one of the problems. Again, because of world opinion and our worry of what the world's going to say, we're more interested in defending ourselves than to go on the offensive and put the enemy in a defensive position.
So, how does it come about that we get a Jewish government that is with faith and emunah and bitachon and implements the ideals of the Torah?
Well, I hate to say it, but I don't. I mean, there could be a great leader, like we had Rabbi Kahane, who, under the right circumstances, I think could have brought the people to a level that they would have this faith and trust. But the enemies of Israel had him killed, assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
So we lost that leader. Will another leader like that come along at some point? I don't know. Maybe. But it's now up to the people. Do the people have the faith and trust? If the people don't have the faith and trust, then they're going to get leaders like Bibi Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett, who are people of small faith and small trust. And they're like a reflection of the people. It's like a mirror image. These weak, cowardly leaders are a reflection of what the people are. So if the people don't show full trust and faith, we're going to get these kind of leaders. If we begin to show this true trust and faith, then hopefully Hashem will send us a leader like Rabbi Kahane to lead this nation. That's the way it works. And unfortunately, I don't think the people reflect that. I don't think the people show this great trust and faith in Hashem. Maybe maybe it takes anti-Semitic attacks and wars and whatnot to get the Jew out there and trust and believe in Hashem. Like after the Holocaust, a lot of people lost their faith, but at the same time, a lot of people said, "Well, we have nothing to lose. We're just going to go and fight to the end." So I think that's the like I said, the basic foundation of the Jewish government has to be that. And without that,
I remember, let me just interject. I remember a few years ago, maybe a little more than a few years ago, Yair Lapid gave an address at a college/yeshiva, I think in Kiryat Ono. It's on YouTube, and he acknowledged a demographic shift that's going on in Israel, that the religious Jewish community is growing in a big way. Obviously going to have an effect on the Knesset, on the country. So he was addressing an audience there, and he was acknowledging the future change that's going to happen in Israel. So with demography working in favor of the religious community, which was very small at one time in Israel when Israel started, if the Torah is at the forefront of these communities, maybe, like you said, if there's another leader that comes about that could instill this idea and this vision of Amunah and B'tachim, that they could rise up to the challenge and show the way, and embrace the ideals of Rabbi Kahane's book, Orat Harayon, and we would implement maybe in a progressive, slow manner, which would actually be sort of quick, because every step in that direction is a correction of what we have been going through. What do you think about that?
well, I'll tell you, I think the problem with that idea is that religious and Haredi communities, they're performers of the ritual that we have from the Torah. But when it boils down to faith, true trust and faith, I can't guarantee you that that's what their rabbis are teaching them. For the most part, they're not teaching them that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the rabbis, as Rabbi Kahane points out all the time, most of them, or a lot of them, are people of small faith,
mm-hmm.
and no trust. So therefore, there's no guarantee that more religious Jews means more trust and faith in Hashem and God.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there are many cases of non-religious Jews throughout the history of the state of Israel, or even before, who show tremendous trust and faith to the point where they gave up their lives, or willing to give up their lives, because they believe that the Jewish people are being redeemed. If you take, I'll give you an example. You take someone like Joseph Trumpeldor, who was a religious Jew from Russia, was a Russian officer in the Russian army, who was the highest decorated Jew in Russian military history. He became a Zionist, comes to Israel, and he creates the first Jewish army in 2,000 years since the time of Bar Kokhba, and leads the Jews into victory during the First World War with the first the Zion Mule Corps, and then the Jewish brigade, legion, and ultimately gets killed at Tel Hai by an Arab attack, while saying it's good to die for the land, and which becomes the rallying point for the new Jewish warriors that arose to throw the British out of the land. So you see here, a totally non-religious Jew, but has this tremendous trust and faith in Jewish destiny and history.
Mhm.
I don't know how his faith was in Hashem and God, but he had this trust and faith that brought him to the point where he was being willing to be Moshe Nefesh, to give up his life for the better cause. Another example was a general in the time of in the war in '56, the Sinai campaign, when Israel was aligned with England and France against America and Russia, and they went to take over the Suez Canal, and Russia started threatening that if we don't withdraw from the Sinai, they're going to come in and attack. So Ben-Gurion, who was the prime minister, I think Ben-Gurion at the time was the prime minister. He was afraid Russia's going to attack us. So one of the generals, named Meir, he says to Ben-Gurion, he says, "Don't back down." He says, "If the Russians come in, we'll take care of them like we took care of the Egyptians. Shouldn't be afraid." In other words, here's a kibbutznik, totally religious, but yet he had this trust and faith in something that the destiny of the Jewish people, that didn't matter who would fight us, we'll beat them in the battle. And that's what we're missing here. We're missing people today think that we can't survive without America. We can't survive without the nations of the world. And they'll do everything possible to get this love from the nations. And that's exactly the opposite of what Rabbi Kahane spoke about. And I don't think it has anything to do, I don't think that they're teaching that in yeshivas, and I don't think religious Jews understand that. And like I said, since it's not going to be taught in yeshivas, it's not going to be taught in schools, people aren't going to talk about it on a daily basis. I'm afraid that the only answer is that we're going to be, we got a great picture of Trumpeldor. I believe was one of the greatest Jews in modern day history. He basically, like I said, created the first Jewish army in 2,000 years. And Zev Jabotinsky, the great Zionist leader, and he worked together with Trumpeldor and ultimately created the Beitar movement in his memory, calling it Beitar BEN-YOSEPH Trumpeldor. So,
and he said earlier he died defending a settlement in 1920, willing to risk and give his life, as opposed to even some of the more allegedly radical, God-fearing Jews in Israel certainly aren't willing to do that anymore.
Yep, he went to the very edge of the border. In fact, the area that he was killed in, which is called Tel Hai, which is northern Israel, was actually in French control at the time. It wasn't even part of the British mandate. He went outside the British mandate, where the Jews thought that the British would protect them against the Arabs. So, but he went beyond that with a group of people to an area which was controlled by the French. So they didn't have any protection from any of the goyim, and they were attacked by these Arabs who thought that these Jews were aligned with the French, which they weren't. They weren't aligned with anybody. They were on their own, and it's because of people like that that we have a state of Israel today. That we have Jews living in Eretz Israel today, who created this movement. Later on, other great Jews followed in his footsteps. Shlomo ben Yosef, and the other great Jews from the Etzel and the Lehi, who fought and were hanged by the British and didn't recognize the British mandate over Eretz Israel. These are the type of Jews that we need, because these are Jews that show true faith and trust. In the Israeli army, there are many Jews like that who aren't religious at all, but yet they're willing to fight and give their lives for the land of Israel. It's interesting that the former chief rabbi of the Israeli army, Rabbi Avi Ronsky, told a story I once heard. He said he was planning to take his students on a trip to the different grave sites of the great tzaddikim up north in the Galilee. You have Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda and all these different places. He goes to a Haredi rabbi in Jerusalem, a very famous rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was the Gadol Hador, the great sage of the century, of the nation, of the generation. And he tells him, I'm planning to take my students on a trip to the burial site of all these great tzaddikim, all these great righteous rabbis. He says, you don't have to waste your time going up there. He says, just go to Har Herzl, where all the soldiers are buried. Those are the real righteous people to go visit. This is what he said. Those are the righteous people. The guys that gave their lives in war for Am Yisrael, for Eretz Yisrael. And that's the truth.
All right, and that's what
we need.
And that's what Rabbi Kahane was teaching in this. If you could, Baruch, maybe one more paragraph from the chapter.
I'm going to jump ahead a little bit.
Okay.
In the chapter. Because he gets into, Rabbi Kahane, he'll in the middle start bringing down all kinds of midrashim and rabbinical concepts in the middle, which are very interesting, but we don't have the time to do it. So we're going to just jump ahead a little here and get to another point. Okay, he says like this. This is an important point. He says, Klal Gadol, an important rule in receiving help from the nations is if a foreign nation is giving us help as what we call Ezra Hadadit, in Hebrew, which in English means joint assistance. Or I'm helping you, and in return you're helping me. You're not doing it. I'm not getting it as a gift. I'm providing you something, and in return you can provide me something because I expect a payback. I expect compensation. So as a payment for what he owes the people of Israel. The people of Israel did something for you, now you pay us back. We're willing, that kind of help we can accept because it's not a gift. It's something that we earned. And that's permitted, Rabbi Kahane says. But if we turn to a nation, to our nations, for help as a request, as if we're Ani Omed B'Petach, a poor person standing at the door looking for a handout, that's a Chilul Hashem. That's a desecration of God's name. And a terrible act of weakness and in trust and faith. So that's it again. That's the point. That's the basis. Without understanding that, you could spend the next 100 years talking about Jewish government. It's a waste of time because that's the foundation. That's the point he was trying to teach us. That I think if the Jews would have understood that throughout history, history would have been totally different. There would have been a lot less Jews murdered by the nations and a lot more Jews alive today, especially when we see the lesson of the Holocaust. To think that you can live amongst the nations forever and not worry about being annihilated is totally ridiculous. There were places where Jews had certain periods of survival, I guess you would call it survival, without being persecuted. But they were always basically, at the threat of being attacked, of being persecuted, of being annihilated, because they were under the jurisdiction and sovereignty of the nations. Only when we're a free nation in the land of Israel can we determine our own destiny. That was Rabbi Kahane's message. That was the message of true Zionism. True Zionism was, we got to go back to Eretz Israel so we could control our destiny and no longer be under the nations. That's why even the socialist Zionism, in that sense, with all its faults, was a great thing because it brought Jews back to Eretz Israel, and that was more important than anything else. See, there's a question here. So, is there any yeshiva school institute in Israel spreading these ideas to the Israeli public? Well, obviously, the yeshiva of the Jewish idea and Rabbi Kahane, the disciples of Rabbi Kahane, sell the books, give lessons, spread the idea more than anybody else. Because again, that was his basic premise of his ideology. The Rabbi Kook movement, in many ways, also, believes at least partially in that. Some of them believe in total distancing from the nations, and some believe that we can get help from the Evangelicals and people like that, which I personally don't like. But some people say, well, they love Israel and they want help, even without us asking them. But again, certainly the worst thing is going and asking for the help. Like Rabbi Kahane said, like a poor person standing at the door asking for a handout.
It's interesting the point you made about the evangelical community, because the former ambassador to the United States, not Michael Oren, the previous one just now.
Danny Danone?
No, just before him. It's an ally of Netanyahu for years. Well, he made a comment, pretty important, pretty revealing comment. I mean, when President Donald Trump was doing very good things for Israel and moving the embassy to Jerusalem, American Jews were not really enthusiastic about that. You see that so many are on the left and they're progressive and they're joining groups bashing Israel, and you have J Street, and J Street is attacking Israel right now about the designation of these 6 organizations for their connections with the PFLP and money laundering to the PFLP. And J Street's calling them human rights organization. How dare Israel do this, that, and the other? They never miss an opportunity to slam Israel.
Well, I obviously those people
it was Ron Dermer. So Ron Dermer said there's more support for Israel amongst the evangelicals than there are from American Jews.
No, it's true. It's definitely true.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. I think it was the 10th anniversary of Rabbi Kahane's murder. It was at the hotel in this big hotel in Jerusalem. It was a very big turnout.
Right.
And I ran into one of the evangelicals, Jimmy DeYoung, if you ever heard his name. And he's got he's on the radio and TV and whatever. But he really loved Rabbi Kahane, and he even gave him time on his radio show and whatnot. So I ran into him at the Rabbi Kahane's yard site, and he says to me, when he told me, he said, when I heard Rabbi Kahane was killed, he said, I cried for 2 hours nonstop. Couldn't stop crying. Jews were happy that and that Rabbi Kahane was murdered, and he has an evangelical Christian who says he's crying because Rabbi Kahane was murdered. It's a crazy world. It's just what can I say? The unfortunately the exile of Jewish people just doesn't leave us. even if the Jew leaves the exile, it just comes with him. He brings it here. He brings it here to the land of Israel, and he acts like the worst, Galut Jew.
Right. There's Ron Dermer with that.
Yeah.
Interesting comment. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's a Rabbi, the Rabbi Kahane brought down, and there's a teaching in the Gemara in the Tractate of Sukkah that says, and it's amazing. It's a really outrageous concept. It says, God is sorry for creating 4 things. Okay, and one of them, interestingly enough, is Yishmael, the Ishmael nation, which is basically the Arabs. So he's sorry that he created the Arabs. He's sorry he created the Persians. He's sorry he created the evil inclination that people have, And he says he's sorry he created the exile. The exile is just so bad. It's such a, it's supposed to be a short punishment to get the Jews to return. It ended up being this curse, this endless curse that exists till today. After everything's said and done, Jewish state, Jews living in Eretz Israel, and it's so easy to get here now. Just hop on a plane and get here. And this exile just doesn't. We don't leave it, and it doesn't leave us.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't leave us. And so we could even see Jews who served in elite units in the Israeli army, like Bibi, like Netanyahu and Bennett, and yet when it comes to the Goyim, they're total cowards.
Why is that? Isn't that really something? And just like the example that I gave, they designated these 6 organizations. So how many people who, let's just say, how many Israeli citizens, it's a broad term, are involved with these organizations? And is the government of Israel that just designated these organizations going to take measures against anyone who supports those organizations? That's what you're supposed to do when you list them as terrorist organizations. Exactly. Their network has to be shut down complete. You go to the
you see
different gates, buses are stoned, Jews are harassed, beaten up, fire bombs are thrown. Like, what? A Jewish government? What?
Well, and the problem is that you see here the problem of so-called democracy, and you see the problem here of weak leaders. They make a coalition government with the Arabs that want to destroy the state of Israel. They make a coalition with extreme leftist parties that aren't even Zionist anymore. They're not even, used to be at least, Ben-Gurion was a Zionist. Okay,
Laura,
might have been a socialist, but not like
you see the video there,
but he was a Zionist.
You see the video there of the Magen David with a swastika, and you have supporters of Hamas, PFLP. They're lighting it on fire. They're having a blast. This is in the land of Israel. How does a government, so-called right-wing Naftali Bennett, tolerate that? And we're supposed to be
concerned because they have no trust and faith, and they're worried if they attack the Hamas, the Arab coalition will leave the government, and the nations will condemn us, and so they try to avoid collateral damage at all costs, even at the risk of risking Jewish lives. What can I say? If there was a true Jewish government, they'd say, sorry, but any Arab that gets killed, it's not our problem. You guys started it. You put yourselves all at risk, and that's the price you have to pay. We're not going to hold anything back because there might be some so-called innocent Arabs there. None of them are considered innocent because basically they've been they've been supporting, even if they don't, not the ones who fire the shots or fire the missiles, but they give them support and they give them cover. So they're part of the war machine. They can't escape.
No, listen, when you have the head of the Arab List Party congratulating Khalida Jarrar, one of the leaders of the PFLP, and celebrating with her, he represents quite a segment of the Arab population in Israel who are citizens in Israel, congratulating a leader of the PFLP, which is on the terror list, which has that network of these 6 organizations. You have Zvi Hendel, who's part of the coalition government, who went on record saying he'd rather sit in a coalition government with the Arab List Party than Itamar Ben-Gvir. What gives with these guys? Here's the evidence: PFLP killing Jews,
self-hating Jews. It's nothing new. Self-hating Jews. They hate the fact that they're Jewish. They hate the fact that they live in the land of Israel, and they'll do anything possible to destroy it.
It's unreal. It's like, are we dreaming this, or this is what's going on?
It's real, man. It's real.
And people like him would like to burn these books written by Rabbi Kahane that talk about Jewish ideals and what a Jewish government should look like and what laws they should implement in the land of Israel. We're not talking about setting up a Jewish government in Iraq. We're not talking about setting up a Jewish government in India. No country, just in the land of Israel, our little country that was promised to us by God. Every Baptist believes that God made that promise to the Jewish people. And yet, you got members of this government that are fearful to say the truth and want to outlaw the truth being said, and want to demean it also and call everyone that talks about a Jewish state and Jewish identity in the proper sense of what it means a racist and a bigot, and they must be expelled or shut down. It makes no sense in the context of who is surrounding Israel exactly, and the history and what their value system is compared to our value system. Compare an Islamic state to the vision of a Jewish state. Well, you got Afghanistan. There's no comparison. And not only that, the contribution that the Jewish people will make to the world in every single field won't be matched by anybody else. We need this progression to happen fast, and we need someone to emerge that will unite the Jews and spark that vision of Jewish idealism. So it'd be amazing if we could continue. I think a lot of people are interested in the vision. So if we could continue for the next number of Sundays to do this, to teach and let people know what is the idea, because the idea is totally clouded with so many in our community that they don't know. And again, like I said, there's no one's articulating what a Jewish government should be or what Jewish even means. Just like, leave us alone. We'll do it. Patchwork. We're going to bring in the Ram party. Okay, so they fund Hamas. So they're involved with Hamas, who just fired over 4,000 rockets at us. Ignore it. Life goes on.
I can interject. There was always a dispute inside Israel what it meant in the Declaration of Independence when it spoke about when it spoke about a Jewish state. Does it mean a state of Jews, or was a majority of Jews, or is it a state that the laws that dictated are Jewish laws? And for the most part, when it came in front of the court, the court always ruled that it means a state of Jews, a state where the majority of people are Jews. But it's not a Jewish state in the sense of the laws aren't Jewish, and therefore they can make laws that are anti-Torah, and that's one of the issues that we have a problem with, because it's a big difference, a state of Jews and a Jewish state, very big difference.
Right.
You can have a state of Jews even in New York.
Right.
You can't have one. You can't have a Jewish state that laws are not based on Torah and Judaism.
Right.
That's not it. It's not happening. So for right as of now, the Supreme Court has basically won that battle and decided that it's a state of Jews and not a Jewish state. Will it turn around one day? Hopefully, But in the meantime, that's what we're up against.
And in the meantime, we got to keep learning this, getting people to understand this, spreading the truth. So we'll continue next week on Sunday. It was great having you, Baruch, with us, and hopefully a lot of people will start sharing this on Facebook or on YouTube or on Twitter or any social media platform. Please, I'm asking everyone to share it with your lists of groups and pages that you're part of. We'll reach a lot more people. So it's been a pleasure having you, Baruch, to discuss this, because this is an issue that I think is
keep up the good work.
Well, thank you very much, and you too. And you had a terrific Shabbat in Hebron, like you mentioned, over Chaya Sarah, and thousands of Jews were there, and it is amazing. And be nice when there really is a Jewish government that will build up the Jewish Hebron. So I remember Miriam Levinger with her vision of what Hebron should be, and we're not there yet, but it should be. And also there must be the absence of the threat of terror from Arab terrorist groups and their allies and proxies that Jews shouldn't have to fear. Government of Israel, Jewish government, should take measures to make sure that there is no threat.
Yep.
Baruch, final words before we sign off. Go ahead.
What's that?
Final words before we sign off.
Final word. Final word is we have to have true faith and trust that we're in the process of being redeemed, that the Jewish people is for us to all come back to the land of Israel, fight the wars of Hashem, to redeem the land, not to be afraid of the nations, not to rely on them, but to rely on our trust in Hashem, that He'll redeem us and He'll save us under any circumstance. And that's really where Rabbi Kahane, I had a discussion with some people about tshuva. See, Rabbi Kahane, the important tshuva is really the public, the national tshuva, of returning to the scholar warrior nation of King David and that type of leadership. The scholar warrior like David HaMelech and some of his descendants, who both were giants in Torah and had no fear of the enemy and would go out and fight with the soldiers. That's what we need. That's what we require to go forward. And hopefully, like I said, if the people show more faith and trust, then Hashem will want to send us a leader that we deserve. We didn't deserve Rabbi Kahane. He was far greater than the nation. So when that happens, God takes him away because we didn't deserve him. So it's our job to spread the word, like you said, spread the word. Everybody should do their job, spreading the word. There are books out there, and that spread the Jewish idea. As long as you study them. By studying them, you know what to answer people. You give them as a present. A present for a bar mitzvah, a bat mitzvah, whatever. Kids have an opportunity to learn the true Jewish idea, and that's right now, I guess, a very big step if we took that upon ourselves to really spread the word. I think it could change a lot.
Absolutely. Baruch, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be with you next week,
Anytime.
Sunday again, same time. It'll be a
Okay.
pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right.
And thank you very much, everyone that participated and joined us, and please share this widely on social media. Thank you very much. Until
Hey, Meir, we do have a quick little song which people who want to continue to follow can. It's about 4 minutes long, and it's perfect because it is Lech Lach by Debbie Friedman, who basically was the Joan Baez of Jewish music, but it goes right along with what we were saying. So before we close out, I just wanted to, again, as always, thank our sponsors for the episode, which is certainly, we want to thank BDS. We can't go without thank BDS. Buy Israeli products, donate to Israeli charities, and support the state of Israel. And of course, our final sponsor for the evening before we do our closing song is the concealed carry talit bag. Don't leave home without it. And without any further ado, let's play a little music.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on the Sunday. Like I said before, please share this, but we're going to have a regular series where we will be educating as many as we can through our platform on the Jewish idea, according to Rabbi Kahane, on issues pertinent to the Jewish future. What we're going to be discussing going forward is what is a Jewish government, what is a Jew, definitions. We're going to be getting into that. join us next week, Sunday. Also, we're going to have a show to discuss issues, pertinent issues of anti-Semitism, threats against the community, this Wednesday coming up as well, where we'll be discussing the anti-Semitic tour by Roger Waters in greater depth. And we're going to be joined Wednesday night with David Schoen, who was one of the lawyers representing former President Donald Trump in the impeachment hearings, where David Schoen was very successful in that hearing. And he's very involved also combating anti-Semitism, combating the BDS. I believe he's the director now of the Zionist Organization of America. So it's going to be a very interesting show that we're going to have Wednesday night, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Join us then as well. So our platform, our program, we address issues affecting the Jewish people, anti-Semitism, and issues affecting Israel and the vision that should be for Israel. We have to spread the word. We have to spread the truth. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you very much.
Shalom